There are few concepts in the study of politics that have generated as much theory, analysis, or prognostication as that of representation. The meaning of representation has been debated for centuries, going back to the ancient Greek philosophers. Today, what do we mean when we refer to a member of Congress as a representative, or to Congress itself as a representative institution? Much has been written on these questions. I will summarize the four major meanings of representation. Formal representation refers to the formal authority that one person has to act officially on behalf of others. This authority is usually conferred through an institutionalized process, such as an election. John Carter of Round Rock has been elected by the voters of the 31st Congressional District in Texas as their representative. It is Mr. Carter's formal authority to act on behalf of his constituents. In other words, his authority to cast votes in the United States House of Representatives for his district, not whether his constituents agree with the way he casts those votes. That defines representation in this usage. Congress as a whole, then, is a representative institution in that its members have the formal authority to act on behalf of their respective constituencies. Demographic representation refers to the extent to which a member shares the same demographic characteristics of his or her constituents. Under this meaning, for Congress to be a representative institution, its membership must mirror the characteristics of the general population. Congress must be a portrait in miniature of the population. As the authors of your textbook point out, the membership of Congress does not reflect the diversity of the general population. For example, strictly in terms of their numbers, females, African Americans, Latinos, and young people are underrepresented in Congress, while lawyers, people with graduate degrees, Protestants, and the wealthy are overrepresented in Congress. The fact that Congress is not demographically representative of the general population does not necessarily mean that certain groups have more or less influence in the legislative process, although there are many people who assert that this is exactly the implication that should be drawn. Does the fact that women constitute more than half of the general population, but less than 16% of the congressional membership, mean that the interests of women are not considered in the legislative process? I suppose the answer to that question depends on who you ask. If you were to ask the leader of the NAACP whether it matters that there are so few African Americans in Congress, or the president of LULAC whether it matters that there are relatively few Latinos in Congress, I suspect both would answer, of course it matters. Symbolic representation refers to a member's image and style. Is the representative perceived as one of the home folks? Members of Congress invest a good deal of time and energy attempting to develop such an image. To illustrate the importance of this aspect of representation, consider the following scenario. Suppose that I want to run for Congress in a district in West Texas that includes El Paso. I live in Central Texas. Is there any constitutional provision that prevents me from representing that district? No. The Constitution requires that I live in the state, but not the district. However, what do you think the probability of me, a resident of Central Texas, being elected the representative from a West Texas district to be? It's probably not very good, and not just because I'm a weak candidate. The voters of that district want someone who is from their area to represent them. They will assume that someone from the area better understands their special conditions and will better serve their interests. This scenario is admittedly far-fetched, but can you imagine a candidate who moves into an area with the intent of running at a later time? That would-be candidate clearly will need to invest some effort in establishing a reputation as a local yokel. Even members of Congress with long tenures must tend to this aspect of representation, lest their constituents begin to believe that they have lost touch with the people. Finally, substantive representation refers to the extent to which the votes cast by members of Congress reflect the preferences of their constituents. Do members of Congress act as instructed delegates or trustees of the people? The instructed delegate role suggests a legislator who gauges the opinions of his or her constituents before he or she casts a vote on a legislative issue. A true instructed delegate would poll constituents before every vote and then base his or her vote in Congress on the instructions provided by the constituents. Many people are skeptical that it is even feasible for members of Congress to operate under this model. Although I think that in the age of the internet and electronic communications, it might be logistically possible. Even if no members of Congress always act as delegates of their constituents, we must acknowledge that at times they do, perhaps more often than we like to believe. Clearly, members are more likely to act as delegates on issues that they believe the constituents will hold them accountable for on Election Day. The trustee role suggests a member who takes the position that she or he does not have to poll the constituents before he or she votes. This type of legislator feels free to cast votes according to his or her own conscience, because he or she believes that the constituents elected him or her because they trust his or her judgment. Most political scientists contend that few representatives are purely delegates or trustees, so they have concocted a third role, called a politico, to denote a representative who sometimes seeks instruction from the constituents and exercises his or her own judgment at other times.